He served his crippled wife divorce papers while she was still in a hospital wheelchair. And he did it by text. Not a conversation, not even the basic dignity of his presence in the room. Just a process server in a beige jacket walking into the lobby of Carolina's Orthopedic and Spine Institute in Charlotte, North Carolina, holding a manila envelope with Claire Maddox's name on it, and Griffin Maddox's attorney's return address in the corner. Claire's left side was braced from hip to shoulder. There was a paper cup of cold coffee on the chair beside her that she hadn't touched. The process server didn't wait for her to finish reading before he turned and walked back out through the glass doors. Griffin's text arrived 40 seconds later. My attorney will handle everything. Please don't make this dramatic. Somewhere across the city, Sienna Harlan, the boss's daughter, the woman Griffin had already chosen as his replacement, was wearing the ring he'd bought with the bonus from a promotion he hadn't technically earned yet. And Dottie Maddox, Griffin's mother, was likely already on the phone rewriting the story of Claire's marriage into something that made her son look inevitable. What none of them knew, what Griffin, Sienna, Dottie, and every attorney in that building could not have imagined, was that the ground beneath Harlan Brock's $340 million headquarters construction site belonged to Claire's family, had always belonged to Claire's family. And Claire had known it for 14 months while Griffin came home glowing about the project that was going to change everything. This isn't just a story about a man who discarded his wife for a better opportunity. It's about what happens when a woman who was pretending to have nothing turns out to own everything that matters. If this story's already making you feel something, hit that like button. This channel is for every woman who has ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better. Drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. You are not watching alone. Now, to understand what happened that morning, we need to go back to where this really began. And where it began was not in that hospital lobby with the beige jacket and the manila envelope and the cold cup of coffee. Where it began was 40 years earlier, in the red clay soil of Charlotte's West Corridor, with a man named Reginald Whitmore and a surveyor's stake and a vision for land that nobody else wanted yet. But we will get to Reginald. First, Claire read the papers. She read them the way she had been trained, without knowing she was being trained. To read any legal document placed in front of her, slowly, completely, from the first clause to the last. Her left hand rested in her lap, the brace warm and rigid against her hip. Her right hand turned to each page with the unhurried precision of someone who understands that documents do not lie. Only people do. The petition itself was 4 pages. Standard dissolution language, irreconcilable differences, equitable distribution requested. Griffin's attorney was a man named Douglas Farrell of Farrell & Crane LLP on South Tryon Street, whose letterhead featured a small embossed scales motif that Claire noted and filed away without expression. Then she reached the financial disclosure. It was attached as Exhibit A, which she found appropriate, since it was the most revealing document in the packet, not for what it contained, but for what it omitted. Griffin had listed her assets in 3 lines. 1 personal checking account at First Carolina's Bank, balance $4,200. 1 2019 Honda CR-V, estimated value $11,400, 91,000 miles. 1/2 interest in a joint savings account, balance $11,000. Total $16,600. No real estate holdings, no trust interests, no investment accounts, no land. Claire read those 3 lines twice. Then she set the disclosure face down on her knee and looked at the lobby ceiling for a moment. The long fluorescent panels, the recessed vents pushing recycled air, and something moved through her that was not quite amusement and not quite grief. It had no clean name. It simply passed through her and was gone. What Griffin did not know, what Douglas Farrell of Farrell & Crane did not know, what no one inside that building could have known by looking at the woman in the wheelchair with the institutional coffee and the practical haircut, was the Whitmore Clare Land Trust. 17 parcels of industrial land in Charlotte's Westbury district, acquired over 40 years by Reginald Whitmore, and held in a family trust established in 1983 with airtight separate property protections that predated Claire's marriage to Griffin by 6 years. Combined assessed value, $61.4 million. sole beneficiary since Reginald's death, Claire Ann Whitmore Maddox. 4 of those 17 parcels, lots 7, 8, 9, and 10 on the Westbury grid, were currently sitting underneath the active construction site of Harlan Brock Development Group's new Southeast Regional Headquarters, a $340 million project, Griffin's crowning professional achievement. The thing he came home glowing about 14 months ago, standing in their kitchen in his good suit, saying, "This is the one. Claire, this is finally the one." He had been standing in their kitchen talking about her family's land. She had nodded and asked if he wanted dinner. The scene softened into something quieter as Claire slid the disclosure back into the envelope, folded the packet in half, and tucked it into the canvas bag hanging from the back of her wheelchair. She straightened the bag's strap. She looked at her phone. Griffin's text was still on the screen. "My attorney will handle everything. Please don't make this dramatic." And she read it once more before pressing the phone face down against her thigh. The nurse who had been managing Claire's post-procedure paperwork, a young woman named Angela Morris with a burgundy lanyard in a careful manner, appeared at the edge of the waiting area. She asked if Claire needed anything before she was discharged. Claire looked up at her. Her expression was the same expression she had worn reading the disclosure. Attentive, unhurried, revealing nothing. "No," she said. She was fine. She was not fine, of course. She was 40 years old and sitting in a wheelchair with a brace screwed to her left side and a divorce petition in her bag that valued her at $16,000. But fine was the word that came, and she let it stand, because some truths do not require an audience. She called Patricia Ewan from the parking garage, where the concrete held the cool of the morning and the sound of distant traffic came in through the open levels, like slow, irregular breathing. Patricia answered on the second ring. Claire told her the papers had arrived. Patricia said she knew. Griffin's attorney had filed with the court that morning. 2 sentences. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Claire drove home on Westbury Boulevard because it was the most direct route, and because she had stopped avoiding it months ago. She slowed without meaning to when she reached the construction fence on the east side of the district, chain link and orange safety mesh. Behind it, the skeletal steel frame of what would become Harlan Brock's headquarters, rising against the white March sky. A crane pivoted slowly above lots 7 and 8. Workers moved at the base of the frame, small from this distance, purposeful. The ground beneath their boots belonged to her father. Claire sat with the engine running and looked at it for a long time. She did not feel powerful. She did not feel righteous. She felt, if she was honest with herself, something closer to tired. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has been holding something heavy for a long time and knows she cannot set it down quite yet. She put the car in drive. To understand what she was holding, we need to understand who taught her to hold it. Reginald Whitmore was not a man who announced himself. He drove a 2003 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and 87,000 miles on it until the year he died, despite having more money than most people in Charlotte's development community would have guessed by looking at him. He wore work boots on his own job sites and knew the name of every subcontractor he had ever hired. His office on Westbury Boulevard was a converted double-wide with a drafting table, a coffee maker that had never been cleaned, and a wall of survey maps that dated back to 1974. He did not own art. He owned land. His strategy was the same for 40 years, and it was simple enough that Claire could recite it by the time she was 12. Buy the parcels nobody wants yet, in the corridors the city is quietly pointing toward, and then hold them. Do not develop, do not flip, do not borrow against them unless the reason is extraordinary. Hold. The land will tell you when it's ready. You just have to be patient enough to listen. By the time Claire was grown, the Whitmore-Claire Land Trust held 17 parcels across Charlotte's West Corridor. Land her father had accumulated slowly, unfashionably, without fanfare or press coverage, or the kind of industry visibility that made men like Griffin Maddox feel significant. Reginald had established the trust in 1983 with Patricia Ewan's firm, then Ewan and Associates, when Patricia was 22 years old and just out of law school. The separate property protections were structured from the beginning to survive any future marriage Claire might enter. Reginald had not been pessimistic. He had simply been precise. He told Claire about the trust when she was 26. Sitting across from her at that drafting table with a cup of coffee, she had learned to drink black because he never bought cream. He walked her through every parcel, every lot number, every assessed value. He explained Patricia's role. He handed Claire a laminated copy of the original 1983 survey with her name already at the bottom in the looping cursive of a 7-year-old who had signed it the day he filed it, because he had wanted the land to know who it belonged to. Then he leaned back in his chair and said what he always said when he wanted her to remember something. The land doesn't lie, Claire girl. People do. But the land is always honest about who it belongs to. Hold yours until you know exactly what you're holding it for. She had not known yet what she would be holding it for. She had been happy then, or close enough to happy that the difference did not register. Griffin Maddox entered her life 11 years ago at a land use conference in downtown Charlotte, where Claire was presenting a case study on zoning variance applications. He was charming in a way that did not feel constructed. He asked good questions. He laughed at the right moments and did not try to impress her with credentials. They had dinner 3 nights later, and he told her she was the most competent person he had met in 2 years of working in development. He meant it genuinely. That was the version of Griffin that Claire fell in love with, and it is important to hold that version in mind, because it is the version whose disappearance will cost her the most. They married in a small ceremony in the Whitmore Garden on a Saturday in April 9 years ago. Claire wore her mother's pearl earrings and a dress she had bought off a rack in South Park for $400. Griffin cried at the altar, which surprised him and moved her completely. They were, for the first 2 years, genuinely well-suited, her steadiness complementing his energy, his ambition finding ballast in her calm. Griffin met Reginald twice. The first time was a Sunday lunch at the Whitmore house, where Reginald served pulled pork he had made himself and asked Griffin precisely 4 questions about his work, each one quiet and specific enough to require a real answer. Griffin answered well and left feeling oddly like he had just completed a test whose score he would never be told. The second time was at a Whitmore land office walkthrough Claire had invited him to. She had wanted to share that part of her life with him, that particular smell of drafting paper and old coffee. Reginald had shown Griffin the survey wall and said nothing beyond the practical. Griffin laughed it off on the drive home. All that land and he's still driving that truck, he said. Claire had smiled and said nothing. Then 3 years ago, Reginald died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in the Whitmore Claire Land Trust office on Westbury Boulevard. He was alone. He had been reviewing a parcel assessment. The coffee maker was on. The grief was enormous and private and ongoing in a way that did not soften on any predictable schedule. Patricia walked Claire through the full trust structure 6 weeks after the funeral. $61.4 million in land, 17 parcels, sole beneficiary. Claire sat in Patricia's office on South Tryon Street and held the documentation in her lap and understood, in the slow and incomplete way that grief allows understanding, what her father had spent his life building for her. She did not tell Griffin that night or the next night. She told herself it was because the grief was too fresh, the words too large to carry through an ordinary evening. And that was true as far as it went. She slid the trust documents into the fireproof box she kept in the closet. She carried the box to the bedroom. She pushed it under the bed she shared with her husband, the man she still loved, the man who was still, then, the person she had married. She told herself she would find the right moment. The marriage from the outside still looked solid. From the inside, the first hairline fractures were already forming in places too small to name and too precise to ignore. The fractures did not arrive as cracks. They arrived as absences. Griffin stopped asking about her day somewhere in the 2nd year after Reginald died. Not abruptly. There was no moment Claire could point to and say, there, that is when it changed. It was more like a tide going out, so gradually that you do not notice the waterline has moved until you are standing on dry sand that used to be ocean floor. He came home later. He answered questions with shorter sentences. He sat beside her at the dinner table and looked at his phone with the focused attention he used to give to her. And Claire would watch him from across the table and feel something she could not name pressing quietly against the inside of her chest. She told herself it was the project The Westbury site was consuming everything at Harlan Brock that year. Budgets, timelines, personnel. Griffin was under pressure she could see even when he refused to discuss it. She gave him space because that was what love looked like when the other person was drowning in work. She cooked the meals he liked. She managed the children's school schedules and the household accounts and her own physiotherapy appointments, which she attended 3 mornings a week at a clinic on Providence Road. And she told no one how much the recovery still hurt because there was no one available to tell. Dottie Maddox had always found Claire's quietness vaguely suspicious. But in the year after Reginald's death, with Claire's body still softened from her second pregnancy and her energy contracted by grief, Dottie's suspicion calcified into something more active. She began hosting Sunday dinners that Claire was not explicitly excluded from. She was simply told the morning of that the gathering was a small immediate family affair, and she might find it overwhelming given her current state. Griffin relayed these messages with a neutrality that was its own form of communication. Claire stayed home with the children. She told herself it was fine. It was not fine. When she did attend Dottie's dinners, the commentary arrived wrapped in concerns so practiced it was almost impossible to name directly. Dottie would glance at the breadbasket and then at Claire's arms and say, with a small, considerate smile, "You really should watch the inflammation, dear. I read that refined carbohydrates are terrible for spinal recovery." She would ask about Claire's nonprofit work in the tone of someone inquiring about a pleasant hobby taken up during convalescence. She would describe Griffin's professional progress to the table in terms that positioned Claire as an absence rather than a partner. "Griffin is doing all of this on his own, you know. It takes a particular kind of drive." The irony of that particular phrasing, the narrator notes, is one the audience is already positioned to appreciate fully. Then came Christmas at Dottie's house on Fernwood Lane, a gathering of 11 people in a living room decorated with the specific aggressive abundance of a woman who measures love in visible expenditure. Claire had driven herself because Griffin had arrived early to help set up. She wore a dark green dress and her good flats and sat near the window with a paper plate of food she ate carefully, because the chair Dottie had arranged for her had no lumbar support, and her back ached through the entire meal. The conversation turned, as it often did in that room, to the Harlan Brock project. Griffin was describing the scope of the Westbury development, the square footage, the construction timeline, the strategic significance to Harlan's long-term portfolio, and the table was listening with the particular attention people pay to money they can almost touch. Dottie waited for a natural pause. Then she looked down the table at Claire with an expression of warm, sorrowful candor and said it. "Reginald's money was the only thing you ever brought to this family, dear, and you've managed to run through even that." 3 of Griffin's relatives heard it clearly. 2 of them looked at their plates. 1 looked at Claire. Claire looked at Dottie for one complete second. Then she picked up her paper plate, walked to the kitchen, and washed it at the sink, her hands moving through the warm water with the steady, methodical motion of someone who has learned to keep her hands busy when nothing else is permitted. She did not cry in that kitchen. She cried in the car, alone in the driveway, for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. She knows the duration because she watched the clock on the dashboard and made herself stop when it reached the next full minute. Then she went back inside and collected her children's coats. Griffin said nothing about the comment on the drive home. She did not ask him to. She had begun to doubt herself in the serious, undermining way that cruelty disguised as concern is designed to produce. At her physiotherapy appointments, she would sit in the waiting room and run through the questions she could not stop returning to. Has grief made her someone impossible to love? Had the loss of her father, the slow recovery, the contraction of her world into school pickups and heating pads and careful movements, had all of it made her someone Griffin was right to need distance from? She would ask herself this sincerely, with the honest self-examination of a person who genuinely does not want to be the problem. She was that kind of woman. It is important to understand that about her. It was in this register of self-doubt that Griffin first mentioned Sienna Harlan. He said it casually over breakfast one Tuesday. "Warren Harlan's daughter is on the project team now. She handles brand positioning, sharp woman," and returned to his coffee without waiting for a response. Claire noted the name. She noted the way he did not elaborate. She noted that he used the word sharp in a way that carried more warmth than the word usually carries between colleagues. She did not react. She asked if the children needed permission slips signed for the school trip to the botanical garden. 6 weeks later, she was hanging Griffin's dry cleaning in the closet when the receipt fell from the inside breast pocket of his charcoal suit jacket. Dressler's on Morrison Boulevard, table for two. The date was a Thursday in October, a night Griffin had told her he was at a client dinner in Ballantyne. The receipt total was $214. The line for the reservation, printed at the top of the itemized bill, read, Maddox, Party of Two, Anniversary Celebration. It was not their anniversary. Their anniversary was in April. Claire stood in the closet doorway, holding the receipt for a long moment. Her breath was entirely even. Then she took her phone from her pocket, photographed the receipt, opened her email, and forwarded the image to Patricia Yuen with a single line of subject text. Adding to file. She hung up the jacket. She put her phone away. She went to check on the children. That night she lay in the dark beside Griffin, 6 inches of mattress between them that felt like a surveyed boundary line. And she listened to him breathe and thought about patience, about holding, about the specific discipline of knowing something completely and choosing for now to keep knowing it alone. She was not ready, but she was watching, and she was learning, in the slow and irreversible way that betrayal teaches, exactly what she was watching for. Watching, it turned out, had a limit. The first thing Griffin took was the investment account. He did it in November, on a Tuesday, through a phone call to First Carolina's bank that Claire did not know about until the following Saturday morning when she stood at the checkout counter of the Harris Teeter on Providence Road with her 7-year-old daughter, Maeve, beside her, watching the card terminal display a result that should have been impossible. Declined. Claire looked at the screen for 1 second. Then she opened her wallet, counted out the cash she kept in the billfold from her personal account, and paid the $94.17 without changing her expression. She told Maeve the card had a glitch. Maeve accepted this and asked if they could get the good granola bars. Claire said yes. That night she called the bank from the back bedroom with the door closed. The account representative, a man named Derek Sousa, confirmed that the joint investment account had been restructured and that Claire's access credentials had been removed at the account holder's request. She asked which account holder. Derek told her he was not able to specify. She thanked him and hung up. She did not say anything to Griffin about it at dinner. He sat across from her and talked about the Westbury project timeline and ate the meal she had made and looked at his phone 3 times while the children were still at the table. She watched him the way you watch something you are trying to understand completely before you decide what it means. What it meant she already knew. It meant the watching was nearly over. Then came January. The custody filing arrived by certified mail on a Wednesday afternoon while both children were at school. Claire signed for the envelope from the mail carrier, a woman named Rosa Delgado, who had delivered to their street for 4 years, and who asked if Claire was doing all right with the brace. Claire said she was improving. She brought the envelope inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and made a cup of tea before she opened it. The motion was 7 pages. Griffin's attorney, Douglas Farrell, had built the argument on a single physiotherapy note from Claire's initial injury assessment, a document that described accurately the limitations of Claire's mobility in the first 2 weeks post-injury. What the motion omitted was every subsequent note, the 12 weeks of documented recovery progress, the discharge report from her surgeon at Carolina's orthopedic, Dr. Marcus Thiel, confirming full parental functionality, the school pickup records, the pediatric appointments, the teacher communication logs, the 100 daily acts of competent, present mothering that Griffin had been present for and had watched and had said nothing about until it became useful to use against her. The motion used the phrase physically compromised primary caregiver 4 times. It used the phrase emotional instability twice, sourced from no document Claire could identify, which meant it had come from Griffin's own declaration, which meant he had signed his name to it and considered it true or close enough to true that the difference no longer concerned him. Claire read the motion twice. She set it face down on the counter. Then she picked it up and read it a 3rd time because she needed to be certain she had understood every word. She had understood every word. She called Patricia Yuen from the back bedroom again that evening. She read the key passages aloud without editorial comment. Patricia said, I have Dr. Thiel's complete file already. She said, this filing is reckless. She said, keep it. Don't respond. Claire said she understood. She did. The irony operating here, quietly and without announcement, is that Griffin had just handed Patricia Ewan a document she would spend the next 8 weeks preparing to dismantle at a moment of his own choosing, in a legal filing bearing his own signature. He handed it to her believing it was a weapon. It was. Just not the one he thought. Griffin had stopped being careful by February. He mentioned Sienna Harlan in conversation now the way people mention colleagues they consider themselves entitled to mention, freely, without the slight hesitation of concealment. He told Claire that Sienna was presenting the brand strategy for the Westbury headquarters at the Q1 board meeting. He said it while they were in the same kitchen where the custody motion was still sitting in Claire's cardigan pocket, which she had not yet filed in the fireproof box because she wanted to keep it close for a few more days. He did not appear to notice the particular quality of Claire's silence in response. He had long since stopped interpreting her silences as anything other than absence. Dottie, meanwhile, had told a woman named Carolyn Fitch, a mutual friend from the Maddox social circle who attended the same garden club as 3 of Griffin and Claire's neighbors, that Claire had become genuinely unstable since Reginald's money ran out, that the injury had affected her mind as well as her body, that Griffin was managing an impossible situation with extraordinary patience. Carolyn Fitch was not a cruel woman, but she was a thorough one, and by the end of February, the version of Claire circulating through their shared social network was a woman unraveling quietly in a house her husband was holding together. The people spreading this story did not know that the house was mortgaged against a marital estate they had not fully accounted for. They did not know about the fireproof box. They did not know her name. In the second week of February, Claire sat at the kitchen table after the children were in bed and opened her laptop. She navigated to the Harlan Brock Development Group project portal, publicly accessible, updated monthly for investor communications, and found the Westbury Southeast Headquarters project timeline. She scrolled to the financing section. The construction loan refinance through First Carolina's commercial lending was scheduled for the first week of March. She looked at that date for a long moment. Then she called Patricia. Patricia answered on the first ring. Claire told her what she had found. There was a brief pause. Not surprise, just the sound of a precise mind confirming alignment. Then Patricia said, "We have everything we need." Claire asked if they were ready. Patricia said, "We've been ready. We were waiting for a date." Claire asked, "So we wait for March?" Patricia said, "Then we wait for March." 3 sentences. The call was over in under 2 minutes. Claire closed the laptop. She opened the kitchen drawer, took out the plain paper calendar she used for the children's school schedule, and found the first week of March. She made a small, clean mark on the Monday. Not a circle, not a star. Just a mark, the way her father used to mark the parcels he was watching, quietly without ceremony, because the land already knew. She closed the drawer. There was one more humiliation she would have to survive before March arrived. She did not know exactly what form it would take. She knew it was coming because she knew Griffin, and she knew that men who had reclassified their wives as liabilities were rarely finished reclassifying until something stopped them. She was almost ready to be the thing that stopped him. The invitation had said corporate dinner. Those were the exact words Griffin used on a Wednesday evening 2 weeks before the event, mentioning it with the same casual register he used for grocery requests and school pickup reminders. Corporate dinner at the Harlans, he said. Probably just a project milestone thing. He did not ask if she could manage the drive. He did not ask about her back. Claire said she would be there. She wore a navy dress she had owned for 3 years, fitted through the shoulders, full enough in the skirt to accommodate the brace without announcing it, the kind of dress that asked nothing of a room and received nothing in return. She drove herself in the CRV. The Harlan estate was on Foxcroft Road in Myers Park, a neighborhood of old Charlotte money where the lots were deep and the hedges were maintained with a precision that communicated financial ease without requiring a sign. She found the address at 6:47 in the evening, turned into the drive and stopped behind 2 vehicles at the valet stand, a black Mercedes GLE and a silver Porsche Cayenne, and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Through the windshield, she could see the side garden lit with string lights and small paper lanterns. She could see a catered table. She could see Dottie Maddox in a cream blazer, standing close to a man she recognized as Warren Harlan, laughing at something with the practiced ease of a woman who had been auditioning for exactly this room for years. And she could see Sienna. Sienna Harlan stood at the center of the gathering with the composed, unhurried authority of a woman in her own family's garden, which she was. She wore a silk blouse the color of champagne and held a glass with the same hand that wore the ring. And the ring caught the string lights every time she moved, which was often because Sienna Harlan moved through rooms in a way that ensured she was seen. Griffin stood beside her. His hand rested briefly on the small of her back, and then he looked toward the drive and saw the CRV, and for one fraction of a second his expression did the thing that expressions do when a calculation goes unexpectedly wrong. Then it smoothed, and he walked toward the car. Claire already knew. She had known in the first 10 seconds. She understood the lanterns, the catering, the specific quality of Dottie's posture near Warren Harlan. She understood the ring. She got out of the car without hurrying, accepted the valet ticket from a young man named Tyler, who did not look at her brace, and walked toward the garden with the measured pace that her physiotherapist, Dr. Keisha Brand, had told her to maintain on uneven ground. Griffin met her at the garden entrance. His expression had reorganized itself into something pleasant and professional. He said it was good she could make it. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say anything that acknowledged what she was about to walk into. He simply guided her forward with a hand that did not quite touch her, into the light, into the gathered faces of people who knew exactly what this evening was. The introduction happened near the catered table, in front of a Harlan Brock project manager named Scott Ellery and two other guests whose names Claire did not catch. Griffin said, "This is Claire, my soon-to-be ex." He said it lightly, in the tone of a man who has rehearsed a sentence until it no longer sounds rehearsed. Sienna extended her hand with a warm smile that was entirely correct and entirely performed, a smile that acknowledged Claire as a transitional figure, something that had already happened, already been processed, already filed. The ring was impossible not to see. Claire shook the hand. She said it was nice to meet her. She meant none of it and showed none of that. Then Dottie materialized. She arrived from the direction of Warren Harlan with the momentum of a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment and did not want to miss her window. She looked at Claire with an expression of warm, solicitous concern and said loudly enough for the three nearest guests to hear without effort, "Dear, the side entrance is really much easier for someone in your condition. There are steps at the front that I just don't think are appropriate. Someone in your condition." As if Claire's brace were a character flaw, as if her presence required management. Griffin said nothing. He was looking at something beyond Claire's left shoulder with the focused attention of a man who has decided not to hear what he has heard. Scott Ellery looked at his drink. The two unnamed guests developed sudden interest in the catering table. No one intervened. The string lights went on, lighting the garden with complete indifference. Claire looked at Dottie for one measured beat. Then she said, "Thank you, Dottie," and she moved toward the food, her steps even, her spine carrying the brace without apology, her right hand taking a paper plate from the stack, with a steadiness that cost her more than anyone watching would ever know. She ate. She smiled at the people who spoke to her. When a Harlan Brock colleague named Dana Cho asked what she did, Griffin appeared at her elbow as if summoned and said, "She manages the house," or "she did," with the precise finality of a man closing a tab. Sienna touched his arm. Dana Cho looked away. Claire put a piece of bruschetta in her mouth and chewed it and tasted nothing. While he said it, she held $61.4 million in land 1 mile from where they were standing. He did not know this. The audience does. She stayed 40 minutes. She said goodbye to Warren Harlan as she left because he was standing near the gate, and it would have been rude not to. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with the deliberate courtesy of someone who had been raised to make people feel welcome in his home. He held the gate open for her and said it was a pleasure, and he meant it sincerely, and he had no idea, not the faintest thread of suspicion, that the woman he was holding the door for was the reason his $340 million building could not be financed without her consent. Claire thanked him. She walked to the CRV, She drove north on Foxcroft and turned onto Queens Road and drove home through the lit Charlotte streets without music, without the radio, without anything except the hum of the engine and the receding glow of the Harlan estate in her rearview mirror, growing smaller and then gone. She had 6 weeks left to wait. She had endured worse things than 6 weeks. She drove. The city went past her windows like a map of something that was almost over. She put the children to bed at 8:45. Maeve wanted a second story and Claire read it without rushing, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back held careful and straight, the brace pressing against the mattress when she leaned to turn pages. Maeve fell asleep before the end. Claire sat for a moment in the dark of her daughter's room, listening to the small, even sound of her breathing, and felt something settle in her chest that was not peace exactly, but was adjacent to it. The particular quiet of a mother confirming that the most important thing is still safe. She checked on her son, Noah, already asleep with one arm thrown over his face in the exact posture Reginald had slept in, a resemblance so specific it still caught her sometimes. She stood in his doorway for a moment, then she pulled the door almost closed and went downstairs to the kitchen. She did not turn on the overhead light. She turned on the small light above the stove, the one she used when she came down for water in the night, and it lit the kitchen in the particular amber of late hours and private thoughts. She filled a glass. She stood at the counter and drank it slowly and looked at the room that had been her room for 9 years. The shelves she had organized, the hooks she had installed herself with a borrowed drill, the children's drawings still held to the refrigerator door, with magnets she had bought at a market in Asheville, on a trip she and Griffin had taken in year 2 of their marriage, when the world still seemed like something they were building together. She set the glass in the sink. Then she opened the kitchen drawer and took out the plain paper calendar. She found the first week of March. The small mark she had made on Monday was still there. Clean, quiet, waiting. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she put the calendar back. She went upstairs. She crouched beside the bed, slowly, carefully, the brace making the movement deliberate, and pulled the fireproof box from beneath it. She carried it downstairs. She set it on the kitchen table and sat down in front of it and rested both hands flat on the lid without opening it. Inside 17 parcel deeds, the trust instrument, 41 pages, Patricia Ewan's contact sheet, the original 1983 survey, laminated. And at the very bottom, in an envelope she had not opened since the week after Reginald's funeral, a single handwritten note in her father's careful block lettering. Not a letter, not instructions, just one line he had written and tucked inside the trust documents for her to find. The land is yours, Claire girl. It has always been yours. She did not open the box. She did not need to. She knew every document inside it by heart. What surfaced instead was her father's voice, the way it always surfaced when she needed it most. Not dramatically, not as grief, simply as presence. The way the smell of coffee and sawdust was presence. The way the 1983 survey with her 7-year-old signature was presence. The land doesn't lie, Claire girl. People do. But the land is always honest about who it belongs to. Hold yours until you know exactly what you're holding it for. She had heard that phrase 100 times across her life. At 12, on a muddy parcel on the West Corridor's edge. At 22, sitting across the drafting table with cold coffee. At 29, the day he walked her through the trust documents for the first time, and she had not fully understood what he was preparing her for. She understood now. She knew with complete and quiet certainty exactly what she was holding it for. Something shifted in the kitchen. It was not dramatic. There was no moment of resolution that announced itself, no sudden straightening of the spine. It was more like a weight redistributing, the same weight she had been carrying for 3 years, settling at last into its correct position, the position it had always been designed for. She was not lighter. She was simply more precisely herself. She picked up her phone. It was 11:14 p.m. Patricia answered on the second ring. Claire told her she was ready. Patricia said she knew. Claire asked if everything was in position for March. Patricia said, "It has been for 2 months." Then she said, "Get some sleep." Claire said she would try. The call lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Neither of them said anything that wasn't necessary, which was the only kind of conversation Patricia Ewan ever had, and which Claire had come to find deeply, specifically reassuring. The comfort of a woman who does not add words to fill silence, because she has never been afraid of silence in her life. Claire set the phone on the table. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel the particular electric heat of a decision made in anger. What she felt was the precise opposite of that. A stillness so complete it had texture. The way the air inside the Whitmore land office had texture, sawdust and coffee and 40 years of patient acquisition. She was no longer enduring. She was no longer waiting in the passive sense of the word, the way a person waits who has no other option. She was positioned. She was ready. She was, for the first time in 3 years of diminishment and dismissal and small administered cuts, occupying the full dimensions of herself. She did not go back to bed. She sat at the kitchen table with the fireproof box in front of her and the trust documents inside it and the March mark on the calendar in the drawer. And she watched the window above the sink slowly change. Black to deep blue to the particular gray of Charlotte before dawn, when the city is almost quiet and the light is still deciding what it wants to be. By the time the window went pale, her coffee was cold and the children were beginning to stir upstairs. She had not slept. She did not feel the lack of it. March was 3 weeks away. The title search would find what it always found. The land didn't lie. It never had. The title search was routine. That is the first thing to understand. It was not an investigation. It was not triggered by suspicion or complaint or any action on Claire's part. It was a standard procedural requirement, mandatory for any construction loan refinance above $50 million in the state of North Carolina, and it was initiated by a title examiner named Robert Kessler at First Carolina's Commercial Lending on a Tuesday morning in the first week of March, as part of a refinance package that Griffin Maddox had personally championed in 3 internal Harlan Brock meetings as straightforward and without complication. Robert Kessler was thorough. That was his only notable quality, and on this particular Tuesday morning, it was sufficient. The search flagged the Whitmore Clare Land Trust at 11:23 a.m., lots 7, 8, 9, and 10 on the Westbury Industrial District grid, 4 parcels listed in the public record as fee simple property of the trust, not of Harlan Brock Development Group, not of the construction subsidiary, not of any entity Harlan Brock had ever transacted with. The parcels were beneath the active build. The foundation pilings of the Southeast Regional Headquarters were sunk into soil that Harlan Brock did not own and had never owned. The construction loan could not be refinanced without a subordination agreement from the trust beneficiary. Robert Kessler flagged it, attached the relevant deed records, and forwarded it to First Carolina's senior counsel, a woman named Judith Payne, at 11:41 a.m. Judith Payne called Harlan Brock's in-house legal team at 12:08 p.m. By 12:30, Harlan Brock's title team had pulled the original deed records and confirmed the flag. By 1:15, they had escalated to Griffin's division head, a man named Marcus Webb, who had managed Griffin's career at Harlan Brock for 6 years and who considered him one of the sharpest acquisitions directors in the Southeast portfolio. Marcus Webb called Griffin at 1:22 p.m. Griffin was in his car in the Harlan Brock parking garage, returning from lunch, when the call came through the Bluetooth. He answered on the second ring with the easy confidence of a man who has not yet been told anything that should concern him. Marcus said there was a title issue on the Westbury refinance. Griffin said, "What kind of issue?" Marcus said, "The kind where 4 of your parcels show a prior trust claim." Griffin said, "Which trust?" Marcus said, "The Whitmore Clare Land Trust," and then he said the name of the beneficiary. Griffin did not speak for a long time after that. The car was still running. The parking garage fluorescents hummed overhead. Marcus said his name twice before Griffin responded. He said, "That's my wife." Marcus said he understood. He said the lender needed a subordination agreement from the trust beneficiary before the refinance could proceed. He said the financing was frozen effective immediately. He said Warren Harlan had already been informed. Griffin sat in his running car in the parking garage for 11 minutes after that call ended. The narrator does not speculate about what passed through his mind in those 11 minutes. What is known is that when he finally got out of the car, his face had the specific, drained quality of a man who has just discovered that the ground he has been standing on, with absolute confidence is not the ground he thought it was. He called Claire at 1:47 p.m. She did not answer. He called again at 2:03. She did not answer. He called Patricia Ewan's office at 2:31. Patricia's assistant, a calm young woman named Vera Choi, told him that Miss Ewan was unavailable and that she would pass along his message. He left his name. He left his number. Vera Choi thanked him and hung up. Patricia Ewan called First Carolina's Commercial Lending at 9 a.m. the following morning. She identified herself as counsel for Claire Ann Whitmore Maddox, sole beneficiary of the Whitmore-Claire Land Trust. She confirmed that her client was the trust's legal beneficiary of record. She confirmed that her client was fully prepared to execute the subordination agreement and allow the refinance to proceed. She had just 3 items of concurrent legal housekeeping she hoped could be resolved first, given that the matters were already pending in Mecklenburg County Family Court. Full and accurate asset disclosure in the divorce proceedings, reflecting the complete marital estate, a revised settlement offer, and the immediate retraction of the custody motion filed in January, which contained a materially false characterization of her client's medical status. Patricia said she would be grateful if these could be resolved within 96 hours, as she understood the lender's timeline was pressing. Judith Payne said she would convey the request. She conveyed it to Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb conveyed it to Warren Harlan. Warren Harlan called Griffin into his office at 4:15 that afternoon, and the conversation lasted 12 minutes. And what happened inside that office is not entirely known. But what is known is that Griffin emerged from it a different professional category than he had entered it. The senior director title, which had appeared on his email signature and his business cards and his LinkedIn profile, stopped appearing in internal Harlan-Brock communications that evening. Griffin went to Warren Harlan once more, not to negotiate, but to explain, to tell Warren that Claire was unstable, that the trust had been her father's, that she didn't understand what she was doing, that this was grief and confusion dressed up as legal strategy. Warren Harlan listened without expression. Then he said, with the measured courtesy of a man who has made many irrevocable decisions in quiet rooms, "The lender needs the agreement, Griffin. Handle your affairs." That was all. Griffin called Sienna that evening. She answered. The following evening she did not. The evening after that, the call went directly to voicemail. There was no confrontation between them. No scene, no return of the ring, no closing conversation. She simply withdrew, the way transactions end when the terms no longer hold, without ceremony or explanation, because neither was required. Dottie called Claire on Thursday morning. Claire looked at the screen and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. It rang 4 times, stopped, did not ring again. By hour 71 of the 96-hour window, Griffin's attorney, Douglas Farrell, of Farrell and Crane, had delivered all 3 conditions to Patricia Ewan's office by secure courier. Full asset disclosure, revised and complete. Settlement offer, restructured to reflect the actual marital estate. Custody motion, formally retracted. Patricia reviewed each document, confirmed compliance, and sent a single text to Claire's phone at 4:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. Done. Claire read the text at the kitchen table, where she had made the children's lunches that morning and reviewed Maeve's spelling homework the night before. She set the phone down. She breathed in once, slowly through her nose. Then she picked up her keys. She drove to Patricia Ewan's office on South Tryon Street and arrived at 5:10 p.m. Patricia's office was on the 9th floor, with a window that looked northwest toward the Westbury district, though neither woman looked at it. Patricia placed the subordination agreement on the desk in front of Claire. 3 pages, clearly tabbed, a pen aligned beside them. Claire read all 3 pages completely, which took 4 minutes, because she always read every document she signed, and she saw no reason to change that now. She signed. She dated it. She placed the pen back on the desk beside the document, with no more ceremony than if she were returning a borrowed pencil. Patricia gathered the pages without comment. Then Claire's phone rang. Griffin. She looked at the screen for one moment, not with hesitation, but with the particular deliberateness of someone choosing exactly how to spend the next 30 seconds. She answered. He was not threatening. He was not negotiating. He said her name, and then he said he needed to understand what had happened. And there was something in his voice she had not heard in 3 years. Not the polished register, not the managerial calm, but something unguarded and raw. The voice of the man who had cried at the altar 9 years ago and meant it. Claire listened. She let the silence settle after he finished speaking. Then she said in a voice that was entirely even and entirely final, "I'm happy to sign, once the other matters are resolved." She had already signed. The document was in Patricia's hands at the desk 3 feet away. She said it anyway, because she needed him to understand at last and completely what it had cost to wait. Not the money, not the land, the waiting itself. Every night she had lain in the dark beside him, knowing everything he didn't know. Every dinner she had eaten at his mother's table, absorbing what was said about her. Every day she had operated on $4,200, while $61 million of her family's land held his career's foundation in place without complaint. She needed him to know what patience felt like from the outside. She ended the call. She stood in Patricia Ewan's office with the late afternoon light coming through the northwest window, and the subordination agreement already signed, and the custody motion already retracted, and the asset disclosure already corrected. And she felt something release in her chest that she had been holding so long, she had forgotten it was there. She did not feel triumphant. She felt accurate, like something that had been slightly wrong for a very long time had finally resolved into its correct form. She thanked Patricia. Patricia said she would be in touch about the settlement review timeline. Claire said she understood. She picked up her bag and walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and watched the doors close. The land had been honest about who it belonged to. It always had been. The collapse, when it came, was not loud. It rarely is, when the structure was never as solid as it appeared. Griffin Maddox's reassignment was announced in an internal Harlan Brock memo distributed on a Thursday morning in the third week of April. The language was the particular language of corporate documents written to communicate a demotion without using the word. Strategic realignment of personnel resources, supporting the growth of the Raleigh Satellite Office, effective 1st of May. His name appeared without his title. The senior director designation was absent. Several of his colleagues noticed. None of them called him. Sienna had stopped returning calls 9 days earlier. There was no final conversation, no returned ring, no exchange of any kind. She simply withdrew from the calls, from the texts, from the shared calendar they had kept. The way a person exits a transaction that has become unfavorable, efficiently and without sentiment. Griffin left 3 voicemails in the second week. The third one he did not finish. He hung up before it ended. Dottie's circle contracted in the quiet, inexorable way of social worlds built on the appearance of certainty. When the true picture of the marital estate circulated, $61.4 million in land that Claire had held in trust throughout their marriage, throughout Dottie's dinner table pronouncements, throughout every carefully delivered comment about Reginald's money running out. The recalibration was swift and unannounced. No one called Dottie to discuss it. People simply began to find prior engagements when she called. She was more right than she ever knew. Reginald's assets were the only thing that mattered in that marriage. She just had the direction exactly wrong. Griffin called Claire on a Tuesday evening in late April. She answered because she had decided, in the measured way she made all decisions now, that she owed him the courtesy of a single conversation. He was not threatening. He was not negotiating. He was simply a man at the bottom of a thing he had built that had turned out to be nothing, asking the woman he had discarded if there was any ground left to stand on. There was not. Claire listened until he finished. Then she told him she wished him well, and that the children would need consistency from both of them going forward, and that Patricia would be in touch about the final settlement timeline. She said it without coldness and without warmth. She said it the way her father would have said it, with the precision of someone who has already filed the document, already made the mark, already moved on to what comes next. She hung up. The weeks that followed had their own specific texture, the texture of a life being rebuilt from its correct foundation. Maeve and Noah enrolled in Eastover Elementary, the school Claire had chosen 18 months ago, and Griffin had overruled. The house was refinanced in her name, Claire Ann Whitmore Maddox, the full name on every document, both parts present and accounted for. Patricia's final invoice arrived in the third week of May, $42,000 for 3 years of trust management, legal positioning, and the careful, unhurried execution of every document that had made the last 6 weeks possible. Claire paid it from the trust account. It was the first time she had drawn from it for herself. It felt, she noted, entirely appropriate. On a Saturday morning in late May, she drove to the Westbury district alone. The children were at her sister Joanne's house, eating pancakes and watching cartoons in the particular Saturday morning contentment of children who are safe and loved and not required to be anywhere. Claire drove the CRV west on Westbury Boulevard with the windows down and the radio off and the spring air moving through the car the way it moved on her father's job sites when she was small, carrying the specific combination of clay dust and new construction that had smelled her entire childhood like possibility. She parked outside the chain-link fence on the east side of Parcel 7 and sat for a moment in the quiet car. Above the fence, the Harlan Brock building was rising, its steel frame now sheeted in glass on 3 sides, the 4th still open to the sky, workers moving across the scaffolding with the purposeful steadiness of people who know exactly what they are building. The construction financing had closed without further complication on the 15th of March. The subordination agreement was on file. The building would be completed on schedule. It would sit, for the duration of its existence, on ground that belonged to the Whitmore-Clare Land Trust. Claire got out of the car. She walked along the fence line to the gap near the northeast corner where Reginald had always parked, where his site trailer still sat on Parcel 7 in the space she had paid the monthly ground fee to hold because she could not bring herself to move it. The trailer was the same rusted cream color it had always been, with the same crack running along the bottom left window frame that Reginald had taped from the inside with duct tape in 2009 and never repaired because it didn't let in water and therefore didn't require attention. She put her hand on the door handle. It was warm from the morning sun. Inside, the drafting table, the coffee maker, the wall of survey maps. The smell and sawdust and coffee and old paper arrived so completely and immediately that she stood still in the doorway for a long moment before she moved. She took the laminated 1983 survey from the flat file drawer where she had kept it since Reginald's death. She carried it outside and sat on the metal step and held it in both hands. At the bottom, in a 7-year-old's looping cursive, was her name, Claire Ann Whitmore. The ink was 42 years old. Her father had guided her hand for the A in Ann, she remembered. She had been worried she wouldn't do it right. He had said, "Just make it yours. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." She looked at her name for a long time. "The land doesn't lie, Claire girl." It was not a voice from outside. It was a voice from inside, from the place where everything her father had taught her had settled and stayed, patient as parcel lines, permanent as deed records. The land doesn't lie. Hold yours until you know exactly what you're holding it for. She had held it. She knew now what it was for. Not the money, though the money was real and the protection it afforded her children was real, and she would not pretend otherwise. Not the legal outcome, not the retracted custody motion, not the corrected asset schedule. Those were consequences. What she had been holding it for was this: the moment she could sit on her own ground, in the morning light, wearing no costume at all, and simply be the person her father had always known she was. Reginald Whitmore's daughter, patient, competent, present. She had been that person through all of it. Through the hospital lobby and the financial disclosure and the engagement party and the Christmas dinner and the dark kitchen mornings and the long quiet years of holding what she had been given. She had been pretending only one thing, that she was without resource. Everything else had been entirely, exactly herself. If this story moves something in you, please leave a like. It helps more people find it when they need it. And tell us in the comments, has someone ever underestimated you and found out they were wrong? Drop your comment below. Tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Claire set the survey in her lap. She looked out at the cranes still turning above lots 7 through 10, the building rising floor by floor above her family's ground, the Saturday morning sky above Charlotte wide and clear, and asking nothing of anyone. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel vindicated exactly. She felt at last like herself. She had always been herself. She had simply been waiting, patient as soil, honest as land, for everyone else to find out.